You know that feeling when you're walking into what should be your victory lap and instead you get sucker punched? That's exactly what happened to me on what was supposed to be my second to last day at MidStates Financial. I'm Russell Patterson, 53 years old, and I'd been building and maintaining their computer systems for 31 years. Tomorrow was going to be my retirement party. I'd even brought my old Navy thermos with fresh coffee to celebrate. Instead, I walked into Catherine Davis's office and found her holding a termination letter with my name on it. "This is effective immediately," she said, not even looking me in the eye. "Your role has been dissolved due to strategic restructuring." Just like that. 31 years of my life, and she couldn't even shake my hand goodbye. More importantly, she'd just cost me my $1.4 million pension. Money I'd earned over 3 decades of keeping their systems running. Money I needed for my son Brian's final year of college tuition. Let me back up and tell you how I got to this point. I started at MidStates back in 1993, right after I got out of the Navy. I was a CB, construction battalion, and I knew how to build things that lasted. When I transitioned to civilian life at 22, I taught myself programming on nights and weekends while working a day job at an auto parts store. No fancy computer science degree, no MBA, just pure determination and a lot of late nights with programming manuals. Back then, banks were just starting to go digital. Most of the executives didn't understand computers, but they knew they needed them. I was one of the first guys they hired who actually understood both the technical side and how banks really worked. While other programmers were focused on making things look pretty, I was building the foundation, the stuff that had to work 24/7 without fail. My wife Sarah always used to joke that I loved that computer system more than I loved her. She wasn't wrong. I spent more time with Guardian than I did at home during those early years. Sarah passed away 3 years ago after a long battle with cancer, and those medical bills ate up most of our savings. That pension wasn't just my retirement, it was my lifeline and the insurance Brian would need to finish school at Northwestern. Over the years, I built MidState's entire core system from the ground up. We called it Guardian, and it handled everything: transactions, security, backups, the works. By 2024, Guardian was processing $2.8 billion in transactions every single day across Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Missouri. That's a lot of trust riding on code I wrote in my basement workshop, the same place where I restored classic Chevy engines on weekends when Brian was growing up. The thing about building systems is that you don't just write code. You think about what could go wrong. You plan for disasters. You build safeguards. When you've been in the Navy, you understand that Murphy's Law isn't just a saying, it's a way of life. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, so you better be prepared. Around 2009, I started noticing some things that bothered me. MidStates was growing fast, and the new executives were making decisions that cut corners. They wanted faster deployments, cheaper solutions, and they didn't want to hear about potential problems. When I raised concerns about security vulnerabilities, they'd nod politely and then ignore my reports. That's when I built something into Guardian that I never told anyone about. I called it the Ethical Override Protocol. It wasn't malicious. Think of it like a dead man's switch. As long as I was there to maintain the system properly, everything would run smooth as silk. But if something happened to me, if I was removed from my position without proper transition protocols, the system would protect itself. I documented everything in a report I sent to the board in 2015. I titled it System Security and Transition Protocols. I explained that Guardian had built-in safeguards that required proper handoff procedures. I wasn't being sneaky about it. I was being responsible. The report sat in their files for 9 years. Nobody ever read it. The protocol worked like this. Guardian continuously verified that authorized personnel were maintaining proper oversight. It checked my login patterns, my system health reviews, my security updates. As long as everything looked normal, the system operated at full capacity. But if my access was suddenly revoked without following the documented transition procedures, Guardian would interpret that as a potential security breach and begin protective protocols. I built it after watching too many companies get burned by sudden departures of key technical staff. People would leave, sometimes fired, sometimes they quit in frustration, and they'd take critical knowledge with them. Companies would spend months trying to figure out how their own systems worked. I wanted to make sure that didn't happen to MidStates, but I also wanted to ensure that anyone maintaining the system understood the responsibility they were taking on. Fast forward to 2023, when Catherine Davis joined as our new CEO. She was 34, fresh out of Stanford with an MBA and a head full of Silicon Valley buzzwords. She called meetings innovation sinks and referred to layoffs as talent optimization. She was everything I wasn't. Young, aggressive, and absolutely convinced that experience was just another word for obsolete. Catherine brought in her own team of young hotshots who talked about disrupting legacy processes and streamlining outdated protocols. They looked at Guardian like it was some antique that needed to be thrown out and replaced with something shinier. They didn't understand that some things work precisely because they're built to last. The tension really started building this past spring. Catherine kept pushing for system updates that bypassed safety checks. She wanted faster processing times, which meant cutting the verification protocols that prevented errors. When I explained why certain safeguards existed, she'd smile that corporate smile and say, "Russell, I appreciate your institutional knowledge, but we need to move at market speed." Institutional knowledge. That's what they called 31 years of keeping their bank running. The first major clash happened in March during a quarterly review meeting. Catherine had brought in some consultant from Silicon Valley, a kid named Trevor who couldn't have been older than 28, to evaluate our legacy infrastructure. This kid spent 15 minutes looking at Guardian's architecture before declaring that we could migrate to a cloud-based solution within 6 months. I tried to explain the complexity of what we were dealing with. "Trevor," I said, keeping my voice level, "Guardian isn't just software. It's integrated with hardware systems, regulatory compliance protocols, and security frameworks that took decades to perfect. You can't just lift and shift something like this." Catherine cut me off. "Russell, I think you're overestimating the complexity. Modern cloud solutions are designed for exactly this type of migration. Have you read the documentation on our compliance requirements?" I asked. "The Federal Reserve has specific mandates about how transaction data must be handled. Our current system meets those requirements. A cloud migration would need months of regulatory approval alone." Trevor waved his hand dismissively. "Compliance is just paperwork. We can handle that during implementation." That's when I knew we were in trouble. This kid thought federal banking regulations were just paperwork. He'd never had to explain to regulators why a system failed, never had to rebuild trust after a security breach, never had to guarantee uptime when billions of dollars were flowing through the network every single day. Catherine sided with Trevor. They started planning a modernization initiative that would phase out Guardian over the next 18 months. My role would be transitioned to advisory capacity, corporate speak for being pushed aside while someone else broke what I'd spent my career building. I went home that night and called Brian at Northwestern. He was stressed about his mechanical engineering finals, worried about landing a summer internship, thinking about graduate school. Smart kid, gets that from his mother. Sarah always said he had her brains and my stubborn streak. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked. "You sound tired." "Just work stuff," I told him. "How are your classes going?" We talked for an hour about his thermodynamics project, his job interviews, his plans for after graduation. I didn't mention that his tuition for senior year might be in jeopardy. The kid had enough pressure without worrying about my problems. But sitting in my garage afterward, working on the Camaro's carburetor, I started thinking about what would happen if Catherine actually went through with her modernization plan. Not just to me, though losing my pension would hurt, but to the thousands of customers who trusted MidStates with their money. I'd seen this movie before. Company brings in hotshot consultants who promise the moon. Old system gets scrapped before new one is ready. Everything goes to hell. Customers get hurt. And the people who warned about problems get blamed for being resistant to change. The final straw came during our quarterly compliance review in October. Catherine announced that she was bringing in outside consultants to evaluate our technical infrastructure. These consultants were kids, basically. Recent graduates who'd never seen a real crisis but had fancy certifications from tech boot camps. They spent 2 weeks poking around Guardian, asking questions that showed they didn't understand the first thing about how it actually worked. One of them asked me why we were still using ancient protocols like SSL encryption. I had to explain that SSL wasn't ancient. It was proven, tested, and required by federal law. Their recommendation? Replace the entire system with a cloud-based solution that would save $2 million annually and eliminate dependency on legacy personnel. Legacy personnel. That was me. I tried one last time to explain what they were risking. I sat down with Catherine in November and walked her through exactly how Guardian worked. I explained the fail-safes, the backup protocols, the security layers that had kept us safe for 3 decades. I told her about the ethical override protocol and why it existed. She listened with that same polite smile, then said, "Russell, I think you're overestimating the complexity of what you've built. Modern systems are much more user-friendly." User-friendly. She was talking about a system that handled nearly $3 billion in daily transactions like it was a smartphone app. "Catherine," I said, trying one more time, "what happens if something goes wrong during the transition? What if the new system can't handle our transaction volume? What if there's a security breach?" "That's why we have insurance," she replied. "And disaster recovery protocols. Insurance." She thought insurance could fix a systemic failure that locked out millions of customers from their bank accounts. I pulled out a printed copy of my 2015 report and slid it across her desk. I documented the risks 15 years ago. Everything you need to know about Guardian's protection protocols is in there. If you're going to replace the system, you need to understand how it works first. Catherine glanced at the report without opening it. "I'll have my team review this. But Russell, I need you to understand that we're moving forward with modernization. Your choice is whether you want to be part of the transition or whether you'd prefer to take early retirement." Early retirement. There it was, the threat wrapped in corporate politeness. Play along with their plan to destroy what I'd built, or get pushed out before I could collect my full pension. I thought about Brian's tuition bills, about the medical debt from Sarah's cancer treatment, about the 31 years I'd invested in this place, but I also thought about the customers who trusted us, the employees who depended on steady systems, and the regulators who would come down like a hammer if we screwed this up. "I'll take my full retirement as scheduled," I said. "December 18th. Catherine nodded. "We'll make sure the transition goes smoothly." I should have known she was lying. So here I was on December 17th, 2024, one day before my retirement party, getting handed a pink slip. Catherine explained that they were accelerating the transition timeline and my services were no longer required. She thanked me for my service and said HR would handle the details. The math was brutal and simple. By firing me one day early, they avoided paying my full pension. Instead of $1.4 million earned over 31 years, I'd get a basic severance package. Maybe $200,000 if I was lucky. They'd save over $1 million with one signature on a termination letter. I looked at that letter for a long moment. Brian's tuition bill for spring semester was due in January, $18,000 that I'd been planning to pay from my pension fund. Without that money, he'd have to drop out 3 months before graduating with his mechanical engineering degree. "You should have read my 2015 report," I said quietly, folding the letter and putting it in my jacket pocket. Catherine looked confused. "What report?" I almost laughed. 9 years that report had been sitting in their files, warning them exactly what would happen if they removed me without proper transition protocols. 9 years they'd had to read 12 pages that could have prevented what was about to happen. "The system security report I sent to the board," I explained. "The one that documented Guardian's protection protocols." She still looked blank. Of course she hadn't read it. Why would she? It was just legacy documentation from the old guy they were pushing out. I stood up and walked to the door. "Good luck with your modernization, Catherine." I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked out with the same military bearing I'd learned 35 years ago in the Navy. Control your emotions, assess the situation, execute your mission. I cleaned out my desk in 15 minutes. 31 years of work fit into 2 cardboard boxes, some personal photos, my Navy coffee mug, a few technical manuals I'd written myself. The security guard who escorted me was apologetic. "Sorry about this, Mr. Patterson, this doesn't seem right." "Just following orders," I told him. I understood that. We all have jobs to do. I walked out of that building for the last time at 8:32 a.m., badge in hand. I didn't look back. I went home, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee from my old Navy thermos, and called Brian. "Dad, shouldn't you be at work?" "Change of plans, son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got retired a day early. That's great. So you're officially done? How does it feel?" I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. The kid was in the middle of finals week, stressed about his senior project presentation. He didn't need to know that his education was hanging in the balance because his father's company had decided to screw him over for a budget line item. Feels strange, I said. 31 years, and it's just over like that. Well, now you can focus on finishing that Camaro restoration. And maybe we can go fishing more often. Fishing. Sarah used to tease me about teaching Brian to fish before he could walk properly. We'd spent countless weekends at Lake Michigan, just him and me with our rods and a cooler full of sandwiches. Some of my best memories. Yeah, I said. We'll definitely do more fishing. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and waited. I knew exactly what was happening at MidStates because I'd designed it to happen. Guardian was running its normal morning checks, verifying that authorized personnel were maintaining proper oversight. At 9:01 a.m., exactly 29 minutes after my access had been revoked, the system would detect an anomaly. It wouldn't find any malicious activity. It wouldn't find any external threats. But it would find something much more serious from Guardian's perspective: the sudden removal of its primary architect without following documented transition procedures. At 9:01 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring. At 9:15, it rang again. This time I recognized Catherine's direct office number. I let that ring too. By 9:30, the first local news alert popped up on my phone. MidStates Financial experiencing widespread system outages across 4-state region. I poured another cup of coffee and walked out to my garage. The Camaro was waiting, hood up, engine parts laid out on my workbench in precise order. I'd been rebuilding that 350 small block for 3 years, taking my time, doing it right. Sarah used to joke that I treated that engine with more care than most people treated their children. It's not about the car, I'd tell her. It's about the process. You can't rush quality work. She understood. She'd watched me approach every project the same way, whether it was rebuilding an engine, writing code, or raising our son. Measure twice, cut once, plan for problems. Build things that last. My phone kept ringing. Different numbers now. Probably other executives, maybe board members. I could imagine the panic in that glass tower. People running around trying to figure out why their computer systems had suddenly stopped cooperating. At 10:15, a news van pulled up outside my house. I went back inside and closed the garage door. The reporter knocked on my front door for 10 minutes before giving up. I watched through the kitchen window as she did a stand-up report on my front lawn, probably explaining to viewers that this was the home of the disgruntled former employee responsible for the banking crisis. Disgruntled. They always use that word when someone stood up for themselves. By noon, my phone had received 43 missed calls and 67 text messages. I'd read a few of them. Russell, we need to talk immediately. Catherine, please call me, we can work this out. Catherine, legal is involved now, you need to respond. Catherine. I deleted them all and turned off the phone. Outside, 3 more news vans had joined the first one. My quiet retirement was officially over. By 3:00 p.m., it wasn't just a technical problem anymore. It was a full-blown financial crisis. MidStates stock had dropped 15.7% before trading was halted. The bank's market cap had lost $480 million in 6 hours. ATMs across 4 states displayed service temporarily unavailable messages. Online banking was down. Mobile apps weren't working. Even the branch computers were locked out of core systems. Catherine held an emergency press conference, standing behind a podium with the MidStates logo, trying to reassure customers that this was just a temporary technical issue. She looked composed on camera, but I knew what was happening behind those glass walls. Pure panic. Laura Bennett, the lead systems engineer, was probably explaining to a room full of executives that they couldn't override Guardian's protection protocols. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It just didn't trust them anymore. See, Guardian wasn't like other computer systems. Most programs follow orders blindly. You tell them to do something, they do it, even if it's stupid or dangerous. But I'd built something different into Guardian, a kind of electronic conscience that evaluated whether commands made sense within the context of proper banking procedures. When I was suddenly terminated without following documented transition protocols, Guardian interpreted that as a potential security breach. Maybe hackers had taken over the company. Maybe there was a hostile takeover. Maybe external forces were trying to compromise the system. Guardian couldn't know for sure, so it did what any good security system should do. It protected the assets under its control until the situation could be properly evaluated. The beautiful thing was that Guardian wasn't destroying anything. Customer account data was safe. Transaction records were intact. The system was just refusing to process new transactions until proper authorization could be restored. From Guardian's perspective, it was being responsible. From Catherine's perspective, it was a disaster. Around 4:00 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a business suit holding legal papers. Process server, probably. I didn't answer. Whatever they were trying to serve me with could wait. An hour later, my phone rang, Brian calling from Northwestern. "Dad, I just saw the news. Are you okay? They're saying MidStates is having some kind of computer meltdown, and they mentioned your name." I'd been dreading this call. "I'm fine, son. Just some workplace drama." "Dad." Brian's voice was serious now. He'd inherited his mother's ability to cut through nonsense. "The news said you were terminated yesterday, and now the bank's computer system is down. That's not a coincidence." "Smart kid. Too smart to lie to." "You're right," I said. "It's not a coincidence. They fired me one day before retirement to avoid paying my pension. The computer system I built has security protocols that activate when something like that happens. Silence on the other end. Then, how much pension money are we talking about? 1.4 million. Another pause. "Dad, that's my tuition money, isn't it? And graduate school, and don't worry about that right now. Focus on your finals." "How can I focus on finals when my education just got hijacked by corporate greed?" That's when I knew Brian was truly his mother's son. Sarah never could stand injustice, especially when it hurt people she cared about. "The system will resolve itself," I told him, "one way or another." "What does that mean?" "It means your old man built something that protects itself. And sometimes protection looks like a fight." By 6:00 p.m., the crisis had reached the evening news. Every major network was carrying the story. Regional bank paralyzed by rogue computer system. They interviewed angry customers, worried employees, and financial analysts predicting doom. Catherine appeared on the 7:00 news, flanked by lawyers and PR specialists. She announced that MidStates was exploring all legal options to resolve the situation, including potential charges against former employees who might have sabotaged critical infrastructure. Sabotage. That's what they called it when your own security system worked too well. The next morning, I woke up to find my lawyer's business card slipped under my front door, along with a note. "Russell, Channel 7 wants an interview. Might be time to tell your side. Jim Martinez." Jim was a good guy, an old Navy buddy who'd gone to law school after his service. I'd called him the night before, just in case. I made coffee, sat in my kitchen, and thought about Sarah. She'd always told me to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. At 10:00 a.m., I called Channel 7. The interview aired that evening. I kept it simple, explaining that I'd built security protocols to protect the bank from improper transitions. I showed them my 2015 documentation, still unread after 9 years. I explained that firing a senior systems architect one day before retirement without proper handoff procedures was exactly the kind of situation that triggered protective protocols. "This isn't sabotage," I told the reporter. "This is a security system doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting the bank from poor management decisions." The next day, MidStates' board of directors held an emergency meeting. By noon, Catherine Davis was out as CEO. The official statement cited fundamental disagreements regarding personnel management and operational security. 2 days later, Laura Bennett called me, directly. "Russell, the board wants to bring you back as a consultant. Full reinstatement, back pay, and they'll honor your original pension terms." "What about the system?" I asked. "Still locked down. We need you to authorize the transition protocols." I thought about it for a moment. "I'll do it on one condition. Brian Patterson, my son, gets a paid internship in your engineering department this summer. Full-time position offer after graduation if he wants it." Done. I went back to MidStates the next morning, badged in one last time, and authorized Guardian to resume normal operations. The system came back online smoothly, like waking up from a long sleep. 3 weeks later, I started my new job at Regional Trust Bank as Chief Systems Advisor. They wanted me to help them build the next generation of banking infrastructure, something that would protect both the institution and the people who built it. Brian graduated summa cum laude that spring. He took the internship at MidStates and learned valuable lessons about integrity, consequences, and standing up for what's right. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting the system work the way it's supposed to.